Keynote speaker'ımız Damian Cox'la gerçekleşecek oturumumuz için sözü moderatörümüz Sayın Erdinç Yılmaz'a bırakıyorum. Buyurun hocam.
Teşekkür ederim. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants of the 6th International Symposium on Cinema and Philosophy, welcome to a forum where the worlds of film and profound thought converge. I am delighted to introduce our valuable keynote speaker, Damian Cox, who will share his insights through his speech with the title Tar and the Puzzle of Integrity. But first, let me give you some information about him. Damian Cox pursued science and philosophy at the Australian National University and earned a philosophy doctorate from the University of Melbourne. He has worked in philosophy at various universities, such as Edith Cowan University and the University of Queensland, before becoming part of Bond University in 2006. Cox has extensive publications in diverse philosophical areas, covering metaphysics, epistemology, philosophical theories of truth, moral philosophy, philosophical psychology, and environmental ethics. On the top of all that, he co-wrote the book Thinking Through Film, Doing Philosophy Watching Movies, with Michael Levine. I can't actually wait to hear him out, so I will leave the floor to him. Dr. Cox, we are all ears.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very, very honoured to be giving this paper, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Okay, I'm going to share the screen now, if that's okay. It's really just got to pick a few pictures, but I think that might help. I'm going to talk about a movie from last year called Tar, and I'm going to describe it in some detail so that even if you haven't seen the film, you should be able to follow the points I'm making. And I'm going to be talking about integrity. So let me just start by talking philosophically about the integrity before I even get to the film. So many people, perhaps most people, perhaps all people, live deeply fractured lives. Our lives fracture in ways that often escape our notice. Most fractures are benign, but some are not. Our lives fracture when our projects, values, commitments, and our framing ontological and epistemological presuppositions, that is, what we think is real and what we think we know, coalesce around distinct things and differ between those things. There are many aspects to a person's life. We lead these very complicated lives. And then we have careers and friendships and passions and hobbies, and we deal with neighbours and distant colleagues and close collaborators, strangers near and strangers far, loved ones, our children, each of which are profoundly distinct from each other, our relationships to God, our relationships to art. These are all distinct things. And what moves us in one sphere of life may not do so at all in another. We may, for example, be deeply conservative in one aspect of politics, but free thinking in another. We may be honest beyond reproach in our public life, but willing on occasion to lie and exaggerate for the advantage of those close to us. If this is right, this idea that we lead these complicated and fractured lives where different parts of our life have very different aims and they're very different values. If this is right, and if it's as ubiquitous as I claim it is, if it's common as I claim it is, then the concept of integrity presents us with a puzzle. Initial intuitions about integrity that are well represented in the philosophical literature on the topic are that integrity is a kind of excellence of character in which disparate or different elements of life cohere together. We are integrated. Our lives are of a piece, as Gabrielle Taylor puts it. The parts of our lives are assimilating into a whole where ideally they are consistent and cohere, as Warren von Eschenbach puts it. Yes.
We can't actually see that you're changing the slide. Are you?
I'm not changing the slides. No, I'm keeping this slide until
Okay.
until I've got some
Sure,
pictures to
okay.
show. Sorry, it's boring, but that's all I've got at the moment. I will show some pictures
Sorry
soon,
for
though.
interrupting. Okay.
That's right. As long as you can hear me, okay. Okay, so yeah, I'm going on about integrity. What I'm saying is we live these fractured lives. But the thing about this idea that we must integrate our lives into a coherent whole is problematic, because integration comes at a cost. For example, a person may seek to establish coherence in their life by rigorously maintaining the honesty and uprightness of their public life, their public persona, in private, telling the unyielding truth to those close to them. This person gains coherence, but they may lose the capacity to love. What is the value of coherence as such? Why do we think it's a virtue to live as a piece? In thinking this way, are we perhaps merely confusing ourselves with objects and, like bad managers, conflating virtue with organizational neatness? So about 20 years ago, Marguerite Lacan's, Michael Levine and I wrote this book on integrity. It was called Integrity and the Fragile Self. In this book, we argued that there is no basic value in coherence as such. If integrity is a matter of being true to oneself, which is another common intuition here, then a fractured self a multiple self requires being true to one's fractures, to one's parts. Pursuing coherence for the sake of coherence is a mistake. There are many hazards in our fractured lives, but they aren't best dealt with by forsaking fracture or difference and multiplicity and living a singularly coherent life. So we thought integrity was still something worth striving for. So we looked for alternative conceptions of it. And we did so by focusing on the hazards of such lives and setting out an account of the kind of multiple virtues that come into play when we are trying to live with integrity. We thought that we were trying to avoid two big kinds of mistakes. On the one hand, the vices of artificiality, when you just don't take things seriously. On the other hand, the vices of inflexibility or dogmatism, when you take things in some sense too seriously. And we were trying to negotiate our way around this. I'm not sure that we were very successful. We're completely successful. I think we made some very good points, but I'd like to revisit our argument about this, integrity as coherence, this idea of an integrated self. I wanted to revisit this by thinking about a movie. First, I might just say a little bit about why I'm choosing film as my basis, why I do film philosophy as opposed to other kinds of moral psychology or ethics. Philosophical investigations of a concept like integrity, which is very important and a little bit confusing for people, they run the risk of becoming too abstract and relying on cliche and working out the logical structure of conceptual commitments based on very, very thin evidence. But where do we seek the right kind of evidence when we're thinking about these things? Psychologists have investigated similar questions for a long time and in large numbers, are using very sophisticated investigative tools. So why don't I just turn to psychology for my data, my evidence? It's basically this. Psychologists are hampered by their methodology, which is a positivist methodology. I'm talking about the psychologists that I know and work with and that are widespread in Western universities. The first step of any psychology study involves what they call operationalizing concepts and incorporating these concepts into validated measures. They're obsessed with measuring things, and to measure something, you have to set out the parameters of your concept at the first step. That's the first thing you do. It's called operationalizing, and they do it almost in the first page. I can understand why they do it, because there's no other way of disciplining the data that they're going to collect and the inferential statistical analyses they're going to perform. And I'm not criticizing them. I'm just going to say that the philosophical work comes well before any of this empirical work. It actually talks about the operationalization itself. And judging these concepts is something that psychologists don't do much of and don't do particularly well. Psychology largely lost connection with its philosophical roots when it turned away from individual case studies to the creation and consumption of data. And so, all right, getting to the point eventually, this is the fundamental justification I have for turning to art when trying to do philosophical work. Film is my chosen form. I think that certain films manage to reveal the nature of ethical experience in a philosophically deep and satisfying way, in a way that mostly eludes the investigations of contemporary moral psychologists and also the discursive methods of analytic philosophers. So I think you can learn a lot from films, basically, I'm saying, because they're deeply imaginative representations and engagements with the lived experience of their characters. The film I've chosen to investigate integrity with is the 2022 film Tar. It was directed by Todd Field, who's pictured here, and stars Cate Blanchett, who's also in this picture. And Cate Blanchett gives a bravura performance in this film, really quite extraordinary. I'm going to first describe the film, hopefully in sufficient detail, so that even those who haven't seen it will be able to see the point of it. Then I will try to show how the film does philosophical work, both elucidating and problematizing the concept of integrity, before putting it to work in my own attempt to philosophically elucidate the concept again. Okay, so Tar is a very high-profile and award-winning film. It was named the best film of the year by more critics than any other 2022 film, at least in the English language critical ecosystem. Commercially, it was unsuccessful in the United States, but successful in markets outside of the United States. It tells the story of Lydia Tarr, of the fictional, it's very fictional, chief conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. The film opens with an interview. It's a very long interview, quite disturbing for some people because it goes on for so long, but it opens with an interview in which Tarr is interviewed by Adam Gopnik from The New Yorker. He's playing himself. And the interview starts with a recitation of Tarr's CV, so we know who we're dealing with here. The film almost descends into parody at this point, and it will do this in a number of occasions. As Tarr's accomplishments are paraded before us, she is, by this measure, by far the most successful and accomplished classical musician of her time. She's a composer, a conductor, indeed the first ever female chief conductor of a major orchestra. She's a musicologist with a PhD from the University of Vienna, where she specialized in the indigenous music of Eastern Peru. She writes music for the stage and the screen. She's won an Oscar, a Tony, an Emmy, a Grammy, all big deals in the United States. And she's about to publish a book, Tar on Tar. But Lydia Tarr is in trouble. She doesn't know it, but someone is out to get her. There's a hint at the very start of the film that her nemesis may well be her personal assistant, her name named Francesca Lentini. Francesca, we eventually learn, is a fledgling wannabe conductor herself. This is a protege of Tarr, slumming it as a personal assistant and expecting rewards. A text message exchange, which I'm showing on the screen now, reveals the casual contempt. This happens at the very start of the film. Casual contempt with which the assistant regards her mentor. This is Tar with the in the background trying to sleep off an exhaustion. Okay. The text message reads, as you can see, what time did she get up this AM? I wasn't with her. S refers to her wife. Our girl's an early riser, isn't she? Haunted. Huh, you mean she has a conscience? Maybe. And the bit that's actually missing from this picture, she says, the first interrogator says, so you still love her then? We don't know who the person is sending these text messages. I think eventually we find that Francesca's one of them, and there's another character called Krista who's involved. I'm going to go through all the people in a second. Okay. So during this film, Tar, this amazingly successful conductor, she's surrounded by 5 people. It soon becomes 6. First, we're introduced to Francesca. This is Francesca. Then she's the personal assistant and the protege conductor. Then we are introduced to a charitable, the backer, a rich man who is a charitable backer of her foundation, a charity that she's running on the side called Accordion. And this is Elliot Cappan. That's him there. Eventually, we encounter her partner, Sharon. Tar is in a same-sex relationship with Sharon, who was also the first violinist of the Berlin Philharmonic. So she's both the most important member of the orchestra is the first violinist after the conductor. And so here we have a power couple, the conductor and the first violinist. The 6th person, another person who comes in, I won't show you a picture of him, but he becomes quite interesting. He's the former chief conductor called Andres, and he's a mentor for Tar. The 6th person is Olga. This is the wrong person. This is another person altogether. But the 6th person, Olga, who I'll have quite a lot to say about in a minute, is a young Russian cellist joining the Berlin Philharmonic on a trial basis. Missing from the list is another former protege called Krista Taylor, someone whose fate will be instrumental to Tar's undoing. There's another character here that I'm representing now, and his name is Sebastian Brits, and he becomes a crucial plot point. He is the assistant conductor. Okay, so that's a little bit complicated. We got a rounded series of characters. We have an assistant, we have a wife, we have an assistant conductor, we have the backer, and we have this young cellist. So these are the people who are going to, make a whole mess of Tar's life during the course of this film. The film unfolds from a strongly protagonist-centered but radically incomplete point of view. Information intrudes on the screen of which Tar is unaware, like that video, that text message exchange we saw earlier, through these social media interpolations like that. And of course, the externality of the medium, the fact that it's a film and it's shown from the outside, almost never gives us any kind of magical access to the subjectivity of Tar, the exception being an elaborate dream sequence at the end of the film. The audience's focus on Tar is relentless. She's on screen all the time. At the same time, Tar is mostly knows a lot more about what's going on in the film and what's going on in the circumstances than we do. And she's not letting us in. It is an ambiguous and withholding film. This exposition of key information is just missing from the film. Blanchett herself, in an interview, noted that, in a way, the film is like a Rorschach test, just a test of, like a psychological test where you see a blob and you have to interpret it in order to work out what's going on in your own head. It's a Rorschach test when it comes to the kinds of judgments people make in terms of the information that is alluded to, but never confirmed in the film. So the film has lots of hints about what's going on, but you're never completely sure. Okay. So the film, look, it's a character study. It's a film about a haunting, literally about a haunting. It's a film about a betrayal, whether that betrayal is deserved or not. It's about the collapse of a career and a public humiliation. It's easy to interpret this as a story of self-caused fall, hubris, Machiavellianism, and abuse of power combined in this character, Tar, to make her fall from grace inevitable. It was always going to end up badly for her because of all these bad characteristics she has. Field's choice to make the protagonist a queer woman has the effect of lessening the Me Too drama of the film. If this was a male character we were talking about, it would be a very different film. But even so, the story I've just recited of, decline and fall and humiliation, that's a very familiar plot and not a particularly interesting one. But I think this largely misses the philosophical potential of the film. I'm going to now, I hope you don't mind me doing this, but I'm going to select out the plot points of this film. By the way, this is Olga, who's going to be very, very important. Now, I'm going to go through the key revelations that come about in the film, because I'm going to use these to make some arguments about the character. So I hope you don't mind me doing this. I'm going to start with the first plot point. Number one, it starts at the beginning of the film. At a New Yorker festival interview, Tar tells us that she's about to conduct Mahler's Fifth Symphony. This is a very famous, very big, very showy symphony. So we know what she's up to. Second, Elliot, remember, he's her backer, and she has to have a lunch with him. She has a lunch with him, and he's wheedling her. That is, he's really begging her to give her a copy of her annotated score of this symphony. That's Mahler's symphony with her markings about how you get the orchestra to play various bits. A conductor's annotations like this are very personal, and they're a substantive creative work in themselves. And they're very much the conductor's own intellectual property. So this man asking her for them is very strange. She dismisses his request out of hand. And we also learn in this conversation that he had already begged the score from Tar's assistant, Francesca. So this guy is out, oddly, for a copy of her score. We find out that he's actually a conductor, an amateur conductor. Now, I'm not sure he's very good, but he's an amateur conductor. He's very rich, so he can get his way and conduct orchestras. But he's not a professional, and he really wants her help. She's not given it. Okay, scene number 3. Tar takes a masterclass in conducting at Juilliard, and it goes very, very badly. She upsets a young BIPOC pangender person. So BIPOC meaning Black or Indigenous person of color, and pangender meaning a person who experiences their own gender in an indeterminate and fluid way. Sometimes man, sometimes woman, sometimes something else. And Max, who is this person, and at the end of it, he just storms out and swears at her. And I'm going to have a lot more to say about this scene because it's a very important scene. But back to the story, what's happening? Francesca gives Tar a book wrapped as a present, and she claims not to know who it's from. We find out it's actually from Krista. And in this scene, we also notice that Tar is really distant towards Francesca. She treats her like just an assistant. They're not friends, she just works for her. Francesca, on the other hand, is kind of constantly flirting with him. There's a very strange relationship between those two. When Tar eventually opens the present, she discovers that is a book. And this is the book. It's by Avita Sacker-West, and it's called The Challenge. And it's got this, you can see your writing in there, these strange shapes, these trapezoidal shapes written on the front page. This sends Tar into a panic. We have no idea why. It just sends her into panic. She rips it off. She shoves the book into the waste. Okay. That pattern is going to become a repeated theme of the film. It appears in odd places, like on a metronome that's mysteriously playing at night. We don't know why. In her, Tar has this young child who I perhaps should have mentioned earlier, Petra, an adopted child. Petra's got some, you see Petra playing with plasticine and suddenly there's that shape again. We don't know what it's doing, but it's really, really upsetting our character. Tar. Okay, now, please keep with me for a little bit longer. There's a few more plot points to go before we get to the crunch. Tar oversees auditions for a new cellist. This is Olga. She's a very attractive young woman. And Tar sees her in the toilets. This shows what kind of character Tar is. She sees Olga in the toilets and notices her green boots. Then later on, there's an audition for a cellist. Now, these auditions are blind. They're undertaken behind a screen, so you can't see who's playing. But Tar notices as one of the auditionees walks off these green boots, so she knows it's Olga. And she changes Olga's score. She's clearly attracted to this woman. Tar later has lunch with Olga. She's selected for the orchestra. She's having lunch with her, and Olga mentions that she performs Elgar's cello concerto, which is a very well-known and favorite concerto in the repertoire. Later, Tar listens to the performance on YouTube, and then she goes straight ahead and suggests that the concerto be the companion piece to the Mahler concert. Mahler, the Symphony No. 5, is a long symphony, but not long enough to be a whole concert. That's usually accompanied by another piece, and so Tar decides that the cello concerto of Elgar, of all things, is going to be the accompanying piece, just to get Olga into the story. She manipulates affairs, sidelining the lead of the cello section. It's really very harsh what she does, to ensure that Olga gets the part. Remember, Olga's just a new, young cellist who's just arrived. She's not even an official member of the orchestra yet. She's on trial. And here it is, because she's attracted to her, she's promoting her to this extraordinary soloist position. It's all very, very strange. Okay, so the film takes a dark turn at this point. So far, we've just been seeing Tar, behaving with great authority and overconfidence. But then something happens. Francesca comes to Tar. Remember, Francesca's the assistant. She comes to Tar and says that Krista, she who gave the book we're looking at now with the shapes, the former protege, has committed suicide. And Tar responds to this very strangely, in a very cold response. She says, quote, to the stricken Francesca, "There's nothing we could have done to stop her. She wasn't one of us." Tar insists that Francesca delete all email correspondence about Krista from her own computer, and Tar does the same. And this is where we learn that Tar has actually been blocking Krista's career the whole time. She's been sending these really harsh claims that this person is unstable and should not be hired. She can't be a conductor. Please avoid her. She's been not just blocking Krista's career, but making sure that she doesn't have one. Francesca actually doesn't delete Krista's emails, and she lies about it. Tar learns about this and then confronts her. All right, so tensions are building. Olga manipulates and flirts with Tar. I mean, that's the relationship between this young cellist and Tar is really interesting. Tar gives every indication that she's really smitten by the young cellist. And where Tar expects a growing intimacy, Olga plays her like a cello. There's quite a few scenes with Olga where Olga is flirting with Tar outrageously. But then she, for instance, tells a lie to Tar and then gets to and then just avoids her company. So she's playing with this character, using her. Now, there has to be another plot point here. It's a very complicated film. The issue of Tar's assistant conductor, Sebastian Brix, who we saw earlier, now becomes important. Tar becomes dissatisfied with his performance. He's been around for a long time and he's not really performing well and he's not giving very good advice. She decides to rotate him out, that is, move him to a provincial orchestra where he'll be able to conduct more frequently but will no longer play with the Berlin Philharmonic. When discussing the possibility of Sebastian, who accuses Tar of corruption, moving him aside to make way for her lover, Francesca. He just puts it on the table. And of course, Tar bridles at this accusation, this aspersion on her integrity. So look, a perfect storm has brewed in this complicated affair. Tar is trying to hide her treatment of Krista, who's committed suicide. Francesca, her assistant, and Krista, her former assistant, were very close. Tar's integrity is impugned over her apparent preference for Francesca. Francesca has lied to her about deleting Krista's emails. Tar needs to select a new assistant conductor. This is a storm. And here, Tar makes the crucial mistake. She makes a decision which is going to bring her down. She decides to select somebody other than Francesca for the role of assistant conductor. She's going to go with somebody with more experience. After this crucial decision, the film follows a very predictable path. Francesca betrays Tar. She leaks the emails. She re-edits and releases the disastrous Juilliard masterclass I mentioned earlier in a blatantly dishonest and defamatory way. Tar is pursued by Krista's parents, who blame her for the suicide, and she's taken to court over it. She's dogged by protesters on the streets carrying placards saying, "We love Krista." She's preemptively, so suddenly just sacked from the Berlin Philharmonic and replaced by, of all people, Elliot Kaplan, the amateur conductor, the person who was supposed to be helping her. Her partner, Sharon, who's been a distant figure throughout this whole film, takes umbrage and she abandons Tar and refuses her to even see her own daughter. In the climactic scene of the film, Tar storms on stage during the opening of Mahler's Fifth, where Kaplan is at the podium. She knocks him over. She screams that he has stolen her property, that is the score he has, and tries to take the podium herself. And then she's escorted from the building. The rest of the film follows her travails, her work and her difficulty after dismissal. She visits her home in America. We learn she comes from a lower middle-class family on Staten Island in New York. She rediscovers her love of Bernstein. She travels to a country in Southeast Asia. This is actually filmed in Thailand, but for some reason, the filmmakers decided to pretend that it's the Philippines. She's shocked by an accidental encounter with prostitution there. She conducts the score of a video game for a cosplay audience, a video game audience, all dressed up in costumes for the Monster Hunter video game. And she does this, a very lowbrow thing, with all the seriousness and dedication to the voice of the composer that she brought to Mahler. And the film ends on that very point. So what on earth are we to make about this complicated story? What you're seeing in here is a picture of what Francesca has done to the copy of Tar's book, Tar and Tar. She's just done an anagram, rat on rat. And from Francesca's point of view, Tar has ratted on her. From the audience point of view, Francesca is ratting on Tar. That is, she's destroying her. She's lying about her. She's sending out all these, she's trying to undermine her, and she's doing it very, very well. Okay, that's the final scene of the film. Not the final scene of the film. That's the climatic film and the scene of the film where she storms the audience. That's the finish of my pictures of the film. So I might just stop sharing at this point and come back. And so let me talk about the film a bit more philosophically. That was enough exposition. What are we supposed to make of such a film? It's been the subject of any number of discussions in which Lydia Tarr is tarred and feathered. I mean, she's Phoebe Chen, writing in The Nation magazine, is a good representative of this. She writes, quote, Lydia Tarr, who surrenders so intuitively to her desires that she could never see their pursuit as predation, strains against a life built on delusion. Every frame in Tarr is as contrived as the person it follows. Later in the same article, Chen claims, the full picture of Tarr's transgressions remains a looming shadow, the number of her victims untold. We are aligned with her, that is, we're aligned with her, insofar as she seems pathetically, desperately human, but never worthy of pity or redemption. Okay, that's the take. So, I mean, it's not like uninsightful or wrong in any obvious way, but it's missing something. What's missing from this kind of judgmental indulgence from Chen is recognition of the fictional, it's fiction, substance of Tarr's achievement. It's like Chen is talking about just anybody who was really underachieving. Chen interprets the character's artistic success as, quote, the comportment of a figure protected by the myth of her own exceptionalism. Everything about Tarr strikes her as artificial and mediocre and repulsive and beyond redemption. But the uncomfortable truth is that in artistic matters, Tarr really is exceptional, profoundly so. This is a fundamental misjudgment that undermines many interpretations of the film. Another is the nature of Tarr's transgressions. I mean, what has she actually done wrong? I mean, the film is inexplicit, as I keep on saying. That is, you never actually see her doing anything terribly wrong. So it's all hinted at. But there's no question that Tarr's behavior and the way she comports herself throughout the film is deeply, deeply ethically problematic. I'm not saying she's a good person. She's not. She uses her power and her prestige to attract young women. She's unfaithful to her partner. She cheats on him. She's arrogant. She's hubristic. She is cold and distant. There's a scene in which she encounters a neighbor dealing with an incapacitated mother while herself suffering from an obvious cognitive deficit. It's a very upsetting scene. Tarr's evasive response to the woman on learning of her mother's death is weak, and she just runs away, really. It's all too human, but it's repulsive nonetheless. So Lydia Tarr is not an attractive character or a good character. That's clear. Is she an ethical monster? That entirely depends on the nature of her abuse of power. I agree, she's abusing power. Every abuse of power is wrong. Not every wrong is monstrous. By comparison, the crimes of, say, Harvey Weinstein are not mere abuses of power. Weinstein is a rapist. He demands sex with menace and violence. The evidence of the film is incomplete, but there's no indication that Lydia Tarr is anything like this. The one revealed attempt to use power in expectation of sexual intimacy is that of Tarr's desire for her relationship with the young Russian cellist Olga. Here, the proffered transaction is implicit and it's asymmetrical. Tarr does not demand sexual favors in exchange for career advancement or anything like it. Instead, she offers career advancement and then hopes for intimacy in return. and she doesn't get it. She's also responding to unmistakably flirtatious advances from this person, Olga. Tar's behavior with respect to Olga is a failure of professional integrity. Her readjustment of Olga's audition scores, and she hears the cello playing and then she finds out who it is and she changes the score. This is a profound failure of professional integrity, and it's an abuse of the blind audition system. Yeah. But it's not a sexual abuse or the beginnings of it. Tara is not grooming another victim in Olga. Her behavior is not predatory in a careful deployment of that term. She's a foolish person betraying herself and her profession because of her libidinal attraction to a young woman. Of course, this conclusion is based on what we see in the film. And the film is determinedly, is very withdrawn on contextual details. But one more point is crucial, and that's very unambiguous in the film. Olga is a wonderful cellist. Her performance of Elgar's concerto is profoundly moving. It is an entirely different lead to that of her audition rival, Martin, from the orchestra, who he almost sentences judges to sleep. As soon as she starts playing, they're just utterly entranced. She's a wonderful cellist. Tar's fallen both for her and for her playing. And whatever else you might say about Tar's behavior in this affair, she has spotted a significant talent. So I'm basically arguing that, look, it's easy to think of Tar as a monster, easy to think of her as simply someone who's abusing power as a sexual predator, but it's not that simple. It's just not happening quite like that. Next, consider her relationship with Francesca, her personal assistant. This is the one that undoes her. There's clear evidence that they had an intimate relationship between them in the past, somehow. Francesca has an expectation that she's going to be rewarded for this closeness and for all the hard work that she's doing with the position of assistant conductor to the Berlin Philharmonic. When she doesn't get it, this moves Francesca into vengeful wrecking mode. However, I just want to interpose this thought. The Berlin Philharmonic is, after all, the most prestigious professional orchestra in the world and has been so for many generations. That's why they've chosen it for the film. It's not just any orchestra. The idea that a young protege of the chief conductor, probably a person in their late 20s, would be the preferred candidate for the role of assistant conductor to the Berlin Philharmonic is quite fanciful. Tar might be guilty of leading her on, but when she raises with Francesca the topic of replacing the current assistant conductor, Sebastian, it appears that they have never explicitly discussed the matter before. During the entire passage of the film, there's no indication that Tar is actually mentoring or helping Francesca to be a conductor at all. At no point does Francesca actually conduct anything. She behaves like no more than a personal assistant. She's running around making bookings. Right or wrong, this is hardly the role of a person about to assume the position of assistant conductor to the most prestigious orchestra in the world. By refusing to give her the post, Tar was both attempting to dispel accusations of nepotism and, in all probability, making the best choice. The crux of the issue, however, comes with Tar's relationship to Krista, the person who commits suicide that everybody gets so upset about, quite rightly. We know very little about what's going on here. We know very little about this. It's not on screen, except that we know that Tar is tormented by Krista's predicament, and then after the suicide, by her fate, and that she's haunted by her death, literally, in fact. There's a scene towards the end of the film, after Krista's suicide, in which Tar is awakened at night when her daughter calls out for her. She leaves Park to sleeping and goes to Petra. As she does so, we briefly spy a red-headed person sitting in the bedroom. This is Krista. What we know is that Krista has become obsessed with Tar, and Tar had rejected her and blocked her entry into the conducting profession. We know that Tar is very wary of this information becoming public. She knows how bad it's going to look. Accusations from the New York Post are promulgated. This becomes clear. The New York Post says that that Christa was just one of many cases of Tar grooming vulnerable persons for sexual favors. But the report from the New York Post is untrustworthy. Almost certainly it's sourced from the vengeful and untrustworthy Francesca. It seems that a familiar pattern of abuse of power is in play here. Tar had some kind of intimate, perhaps sexual relationship with Christa, just as she had with Francesca. Tar's judgment that Christa is not a fit for employment as conductor may nonetheless be right. Our gradual turns on this, and of course the film withholds most of the relevant facts. I think the best interpretation is that Christa was somebody who was not fit to conduct an orchestra, and that she was really unraveled by whatever happened between her and Tar. There's no definitive interpretation. There's no interpretive path forward here. So I'm going just to assume that for the sake of my argument about integrity, I'm going to assume that when Tar sends out those emails saying, don't hire this person, do not hire this person, Christa, she's not fit for it. She's not just being horrible to her. She's not just being malicious. She's making a judgment that Christa really is not able to do the job. Okay, so that's my analysis, if you like, of Tar's relationships. I'm not really defending her, but I'm moderating the kind of accusations of monstrosity that come her way. Tar leads a fractured life. She's a mess. She's a mess from the beginning of the film, actually. And gradually, this becomes more apparent. We witness burgeoning and expanding demonstrations of upset as the film progresses. She becomes super sensitive to sounds, for instance. She starts waking up in the middle of the night, hearing sounds in the flat and not knowing what they are. And this occurs right up until her final humiliation. I'm missing out a lot about the film, of course, because it's a really rich film. Many things happening in every scene. But what does the film suggest about the nature of integrity? I'm going to argue for two things. First, that while Tar displays a lack of integrity in her personal life and in her professional life, so she really does, this is a person who lacks integrity, she maintains deep artistic integrity throughout the entire film, from beginning to end. Second, I'm going to argue that the chief problem that Tar encounters is not that her life is fractured and incoherent, but that it's not fractured enough and not fractured well. I'll try and explain what I mean. Let's start with the question of Tar's artistic integrity. Artistic integrity, what is it? Well, it requires reflective endorsement and dedication to the internal goods of artistic practice. You have to, what is essential and intrinsically valuable in that practice. It requires knowing, or rather judging well, what is at stake in one's artistic production, why it matters, and what in it doesn't matter. Now, notice that this conception of integrity is not a formal conception, it's anything but. Integrity does not reside in the steadfast maintenance of your artistic vision, no matter what that is. It requires good judgment of merit as well as steadfastness. That means that attributions of artistic integrity presuppose judgment of judgment. When we, as self-nominated judges of others, attribute artistic integrity to them, we are making a judgment, which is inevitably fallible, of the judgment of the other, itself inevitably fallible. This might seem uncomfortable, but there's no way around it. Integrity really is an endorsement of somebody's good judgment. This brings me to discuss what is likely to become the most famous scene in Tar, the Juilliard masterclass between Tar and Max. And I might come back here to share my screen so I can show you. Okay, so this scene happens early in the film. I don't know if I hope some of you have seen the film. If you haven't seen the film, it's a brilliant piece of filmmaking. I think it'll become the most famous film in famous scene in this film as time goes by. It's a virtuoso piece of filmmaking. It's a scene lasting more than 10 minutes, and it's shot in a single take. And it's shot without dollies or all the usual paraphernalia, technical paraphernalia for this. It was a very difficult shoot, and it's beautifully orchestrated. What's happening is Tari's giving a masterclass. That's where, someone famous, some prominent musician comes in and tells young musicians how to do their business. Tara is observing a postgraduate student performance. The performance is of a piece called Raw. It's an Icelandic piece of music by an Icelandic composer, Anna Thorodsdottir. She's an actual composer, and Raw is an actual piece. And it's a small ensemble, and it lasts 10 minutes. You can go onto YouTube and find the piece and listen to it. It's actually really worth doing. We hear only a few minutes of it before Tar interrupts the performance. She doesn't like it at all. It's been chosen by and conducted by Max, the young BIPOC pangender student I mentioned earlier. Tar detests the music, makes no secret of it, in fact. The piece of music, Roa, is a profoundly beautiful piece of music, but it's also very austere. It's a world away from the kaleidoscopic brilliance and show of Mahler Symphony. Tar's response to this music reveals just how conservative her tastes are. She's got very conservative musical tastes. She contrasts this music by contemporary Icelandic composer with Bach. And when Max responds that, as a BIPOC pangender person, Bach's misogyny makes it impossible for me to take his music seriously, the snark, that is, the fighting is on. Tar responds very pompously to this. She says, oh, sorry, I missed it. Not to worry.
As you know, we need to leave some time for the question.
Okay.
So
I'll skip to my conclusion. I'll just read so basically I'm arguing in this section I'm arguing that even though her position is very conservative, what she says to this young fellow is very rude, she is nonetheless demonstrating artistic integrity. Integrity isn't about agreeing with people, it's about respecting their judgment even when you disagree with them. Anyway, what do we think about Tar as a whole? This is maybe I want to get to. What about her integrity as a person? She may preserve her artistic integrity, as I've argued, but that's little consolation to everybody else. What has gone wrong with her life? What is the basic nature of a moral failure? I'm going to argue that it's a failure of fracture. It's a failure to live a fractured life. That sounds odd, but I'm going to try and explain it quickly. It is extremely difficult to live with integrity when the clashing motivations, values, and commitments of different aspects of one's life are not kept separate. To have personal integrity requires that one be true in a deep sense to the various parts of one's life. It does not require that you integrate them all into this coherent whole. The idea here is that personal integrity, as opposed to role-specific integrity, requires keeping separate aspects of one's life separate. On this picture, parts and aspects of one's life do not need to be consistent with each other. They don't need to fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. In order to live vividly and fully, we should allow ourselves to move in different directions, as it were, to embrace multitudes, as Walt Whitman puts it. We fail in the project of integrity when we fail to act independently like this. And we basically, that's exactly what we're seeing in Tar. Sorry. So what's going on in Tar's life? I think that she's let the projects from one part of her life invade and distort other parts of her life. Her libidinous projects are mixed up with her artistic projects. Her relationship with her partner is mixed in unhealthily with her role as a conductor. Her charitable organization is mixed in with her private and professional life, supplying personal assistance to her rather than conductors that she can help. She has a charitable backer who's mixed up in her artistic life. Basically, every bit of her life is invading and making a mess of every other bit of her life. And that leads to the implosion. It's not that Tar has failed to form a coherent decision about how she's going to live. She's allowed all the different parts of her life to mush together, to fall together, and to undermine one part, undermining another. And this is one of the great dangers, one of the great hazards, one of the great traps for our personal integrity. We should be living, not like Tar, but we should be prepared to treat the different parts of our life separately. And that's the concept of integrity that I'm trying to develop and pursue. And I think that this film is a beautiful, actually, illustration of where that goes wrong. Okay, so let me leave it there. And I hope I hadn't gone on too long.
Thank you for your insightful and inspiring speech. That was great, actually, because when I watched the film, I hated the character. Now it seems reasonable, so thank you for that. I will ask the audience for the questions. Sorularımız var mı? Hocaya sormak istediklerimiz. While we are gathering the questions, I want to ask one. Though it seems like a remote relationship, I want to ask that again. You said integrity is a virtue concept regarding honesty, being fair, and being true to oneself. If we carry this discussion to the relationship between a director and his or her product, do you think a lack of artistic integrity distorts or ruins the authenticity of the work?
I'm sorry, I didn't pick up on the whole question. So the idea is, are you talking about authenticity as well as? Is that
I'm talking about the artistic integrity that a director have towards his film.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So I mean, what you could argue that Field wasn't sure what he was doing with this film, because there's many different elements that don't cohere. There's a point at the film where it seems like it's literally a ghost story. There's bits of the film where I thought, oh, this is a horror film. It seems like there's a scene when she's walking through the park and she's hearing screaming, and you think, well, is this like a thriller? And there's another scene when she goes into the basement and she runs away from a dog and she injures herself. And what is that about? So in some sense, it feels like Todd Field has made a film in which he's combining so many different things that are pushing so many different buttons in an audience that the film itself doesn't cohere. I think that's probably true, but through it all, what I think is marvelous about that is that the film is mirroring, in that formal sense, mirroring the psychological state of the protagonist, who is also not making sense of everything. And so, filmmakers, as you know, have an awful time trying to portray the inner life of characters. And one way you can do it is through these formal means of really quite odd and not unrealistic elements. So his artistic integrity, I think, is fully preserved, but he's made a very awkward and interesting and strange film.
Okay, thank you for your answer. That was a great one. Sorularımız var mı? I guess there are no other questions, and I think it's getting late in Australia. So thank you for your time and for your contribution. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks very much. Good night.
Goodbye.